Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, helping transform crowded, dated, or inefficient kitchens into more functional spaces for daily life. Details at callmosby.com.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker is asking voters for a third term in office. And this November, the Democratic chief executive is paired up with a new lieutenant governor hopeful, Christian Mitchell. Mitchell is a former Illinois House member who previously served as Pritzker's deputy governor. After working for his alma mater, the University of Chicago, Mitchell decided to get back into the electoral arena after Pritzker's current lieutenant governor, Juliana Stratton, ran for the U.S. Senate. He says he wanted to make sure the progress Pritzker made during his gubernatorial administration didn't stagnate, as he prepares for a rematch with Republican gubernatorial hopeful Darren Bailey.
When you get a chance to step up and be involved in trying to make the state that has given you everything that you didn't get from your God and your family, as Illinois has been for me, you take that shot. And when we can help move Illinois forward, work on the Illinois 2050 plan and make sure that we're creating jobs and making this a great place to live, and when you get to work with somebody like J.B. Pritzker, who you love and respect, that's just the kind of opportunity you don't say no to.
Now, let me be blunt. Illinois' lieutenant governor does not have a lot of power. They don't even get to bang a gavel while presiding over the Illinois Senate, since, unlike Missouri, the Illinois lieutenant governor does not have any legislative duties. But Pritzker's national ambitions are making his choice of Mitchell more relevant. He's widely expected to run for president in 2028, and that could mean Mitchell could become governor if Pritzker ascends to the presidency, vice presidency, or takes a cabinet-level post. Earlier this week, St. Louis Public Radio Metro East reporter Will Bauer joined me to talk with Mitchell about his decision to run for lieutenant governor and what Pritzker's third term could mean for Illinois residents. When we started our conversation, we asked him about his background and how he got involved in Illinois politics.
Christian Mitchell is the son of Debbie Gist, who lives here in Illinois, and the grandson of James Gist, my late grandfather. They were really the two people who raised me, and they are my heroes. And my mom was a NICU nurse, neonatal intensive care, so taking care of literally the sickest and most vulnerable babies for 38 years of her career. And then my grandfather was a union steelworker, but also was a sergeant in the U.S. Army and very proudly served in the Korean conflict. And so who I am is their son and grandson. I grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago, Maywood and Westchester, and had a pretty normal suburban life until, I think, like so many families in Illinois, we found out we were just one hit away from having some economic distress. That happened for me when I was in high school. Both my grandparents got very sick, one with dementia that became Alzheimer's, the other with heart disease, that being my grandfather. And my mother got breast cancer. Fortunately, she beat it. She's a survivor for more than 20 years, but it turned our lives upside down. And I think that really put me on the path to public service. I initially wanted to, be a lawyer and make money and make sure my family didn't suffer. But in meeting people, both after college when I was a community organizer and then during my time even in college, I found out my story was not uncommon. And in finding that, I figured that one way to make a difference was by trying to change the system to make sure that what happened to my family and so many others would be less common, to try to lower the cost of healthcare, to try to raise wages. And that's why I ran for state rep for the first time. It's why I joined J.B. Pritzker's administration as deputy governor for the first time. And it's why I jumped back in to run for lieutenant governor.
There's a lot of speculation that Governor Pritzker is going to run for president after he gets reelected, and I'm sure you're not going to announce that he's going to do that on this show. But it does put increased focus on the lieutenant governor, since you could be elevated if Pritzker either becomes president, vice president, or takes a cabinet position in a Democratic administration. So I want you to talk a little bit about why, if the time comes, for whatever reason, you are ready to become governor of one of the largest and most important states in the nation.
Yeah. JB has always said, he said this for Juliana Stratton, our wonderful lieutenant governor, who's now, God willing, going to be our next United States senator, the number one qualification for the job of lieutenant governor is being able to step in if anything were to happen for whatever reason. And for me, it was talking about this a bit in response to Will's question. I was fortunate to oversee some of our largest agencies, our transportation system, emergency management, and some of and our state police as well as our National Guard. I oversaw a very broad policy portfolio that covered everything from infrastructure to energy, public safety, election reform. So I have, I think, a fairly broad amount of experience from that time on the executive level. I was a legislator, and so much of what a good governor and lieutenant governor do is work with the legislature. So I think I have really significant experience there. But most importantly, all that prepares me to be the best governing partner I possibly can be to JB Pritzker. If anything happens, yes, I'll be ready. But for the most part, what I'm really focused on is how I can be the best lieutenant governor I can be, help move the state forward, help our farmers, help our small businesses. That's the thing that I'm really excites me to get up in the morning.
So as we look at your opponents for November, I have kind of noticed that maybe in some ways Darren Bailey has either broken with President Trump or maybe even the national Republican brand in a few cases this cycle, right? And he's said that he's his own person. He's criticized Trump for posting the AI image that had depicted himself as Jesus. He criticized another AI image that the RNC posted that mocked Governor Pritzker's weight. He apologized for calling Chicago a hellhole, which he did 4 years ago, and he recently even made that appeal to the city council. But correct me if I'm wrong here, your team doesn't seem convinced that he's maybe changed. Why so?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's good that Darren Bailey knows that Donald Trump is not God. I think that's a good start. But I think that the proof of the pudding remains in the eating. I always grew up, my mother always said, if you want to know who someone is, you should not listen to what they say so much as watch what they do. And I think that for Darren Bailey, there are a series of things that he has not changed his position on, right? He still said abortion is worse than the Holocaust. He is still someone who wants to roll out the red carpet in Illinois for Donald Trump. And, not, by the way, not just Democrats in Illinois are turning their back on Donald Trump. So are many Republicans and independents. One thing that Darren Bailey cannot seem to do is prove that he will stand up to Donald Trump in a substantive way. Here's one really good example. Darren Bailey is a farmer. He runs on being a farmer. He talks about that as an important credential, even though he inherited his farm and is a millionaire. He will not even stand up right now as Donald Trump is ravaging the agricultural economy of the state of Illinois. I was down in Jerseyville and Metro East a couple of months ago on a cattle farm. And they are being crushed by higher input costs, fertilizer, the cost of fuel, all these things from the war that Donald Trump started in Iran, but also from the tariffs that raised all their input costs while giving $20 billion away to Argentine farmers. And so you would think if you really cared about the people of Illinois, you were willing to stand up to Donald Trump on the very issue that is the thing you brag about, you would think that'd be the place you'd stand up, and he can't even do that. So why I would think somebody who is attempting to change their rhetoric, put lipstick on a pig, but not substantially change any of their positions to help Illinois women, to help Illinois farmers, would suddenly be a different person. Again, it's a difference between your rhetoric and your actions, and his actions say he's the same person he's always been.
I have lived through an Illinois governor who has served more than 2 terms, Jim Thompson, but I was not really conscious about politics during then. When he left office, I was, 7 years old. So I want to say I was paying attention to Illinois politics when I was 7, but I'd be a liar. So my question for you, given that the governor, whether you like him or not, has accomplished a lot in 8 years, what are some of the main priorities that a third Pritzker term would want to accomplish?
A couple of them are things I think that he's pushing right now, Jason. So, one is we've got across the nation, this is not just an Illinois problem. We have an incredible shortage of housing. Illinois needs to build something like 225,000 housing units in the next 4 or 5 years just to keep up with demand. The governor's right now pushing a build plan that would create more middle market housing, that would cut red tape, that would allow for a wider range of housing types, including things like ADUs, backyard cottages, or above garage sort of properties. Those sorts of things could all bring down housing costs. So thinking about how we make Illinois a more affordable place to live is a big deal. How we continue to lower costs generally and also raise wages, how we continue to, yes, fight Donald Trump in Washington to make sure tariffs go away and the lower costs, but also to make sure that healthcare is more affordable. Part of what you see, I think I mentioned this earlier from HR 1, there are 9 hospitals, rural hospitals in the state of Illinois that will be in danger of closing from the Medicaid cuts in HR 1. And oh, by the way, a whole bunch of safety net hospitals in cities, places like the south and west sides of Chicago, Rockford, Decatur, that could be in danger from Medicaid cuts. So I think it's continuing to make sure we protect the progress that's already been made, but also the other big thing, and it's going to be a focus of mine, is economic development all across the state of Illinois. It's why I was in Jerseyville. It's why I've been to Belleville, to Alton, to Cahokia. I've got vacancies on State Street in Chicago. I've also got main streets all around the state of Illinois that need to make sure they're places that people can live, work, and raise a family. So I think it's that economic development work and that broad vision of the future for Illinois and protecting the progress that's been made to keep us from going back in the way that Donald Trump and Darren Bailey would want to take us.
In terms of other legislation, I wanted to ask about the Safety Act. So if elected, do you think the Pritzker and Mitchell administration will advocate for any changes to the Safety Act, particularly the portion of the bill that eliminated cash bail?
So the thing to remember about the Safety Act, I want to just take us back for a second. I want to remind your listeners what people are defending. People were defending a system that prior to the ending of cash bail meant that your ability, your wealth, was what determined whether or not you stayed in jail pending trial versus your potential threat to the community. We have multiple studies, Loyola did one, et cetera, that shows that the ending of cash bail has actually made us safer and has actually meant we can detain more dangerous offenders. We don't want to go back to a world where how much money you have in your pocket determines whether you get out of jail. Having said that, one of the issues I know people have raised a lot of issues about is electronic monitoring, making sure that the resources necessary to monitor folks are there. That may be an example of a place where some changes could be made. I think there are smart and credible folks, both sides of the aisle, who are looking at things that could tighten the rules a bit. But what we're not going to do is go back to a system where wealth determines whether you stay in prison and not how dangerous you might be to the community. So we want to give judges and prosecutors the tools that they need to make the case for detention and not be in a situation where how much money you have determines whether you get out or not.
So we couldn't let you leave without asking you about data centers, which seem to have drawn bipartisan pushback, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat. And the Power Act is one of the legislative proposals in the Illinois General Assembly that had kind of been seen as a primary vehicle to regulate data center construction. It would require public water use reports, environmental assessments, developers to build renewable energy to power them. And that legislation has kind of stalled, but there is still some time left in this session. So what would you like to see done in this space?
Yeah. So you might have seen that the governor proposed, there was, as part of the Rebuild Illinois Capital program, there's a data center tax credit that the governor proposed pausing. And in part, it's because there's really real concern from folks right now. And on the one hand, data centers can mean economic development. They can mean investment in what's necessary to keep, growing our economy. On the other hand, they can mean massive power spikes for consumers. And I think that when you've got companies with trillion-dollar market caps, they ought to be able to guarantee my energy bill, your energy bill, Jason and Will, and those of your listeners should not go up to do this thing that the trillion-dollar companies want. That is a doable thing, and we believe that we can do it that way. So we want to make sure that, we want to be part of a future that is building the economy and the jobs of tomorrow, but we want you to pay for the energy you use. We want you to make real investments in the workforce. We want you to make sure that people living near these data centers are not the ones left holding the bag.
You mentioned I don't want to say demise of the Voting Rights Act, because the entire Voting Rights Act did not get struck down by that Supreme Court decision, but certainly the demise of the protection of majority and minority districts, which has prompted a bunch of states in the South to start dismantling heavily African American and heavily Democratic districts. There's probably going to be a lot of pressure for states like Illinois to redraw its map in 2027. I guess there's a couple questions I have here. Can you actually squeeze any more Democratic seats out of the current map? And if you can, would that require making existing African American majority or Hispanic majority seats more white? And would that really be worth it just to gain maybe one or two seats in Illinois?
I mean, let's start with the foundation of what this is. And what this is voter suppression. What this is the dilution of African American voting power directly, full stop, absolutely, in some of the states that you've mentioned. But I also want to remind folks that much of the representation that diverse folks of all backgrounds, whether they're Asian or Latino or African American, have comes from the Voting Rights Act. And this has been a systemic effort over 15 years. Section 5, now Section 2, undermining the ability of the Justice Department to oversee potential discriminatory things like voter ID or other things that try to take away minority voting power. And then after making it harder for people to register to vote, putting even more emphasis on partisanship in a way that undermines African American and minority voting power. That's what this is. I will say to your question here in Illinois, we have always drawn our districts in accordance with the Voting Rights Act in ways that are consistent with the Illinois Constitution and the U.S. Constitution. There probably isn't a lot of room here to do much more, just to be really direct about it. And so I think that what the governor and myself and others are going to focus on is how do we support efforts in other states to combat this sort of voter suppression. But we have really focused on acting in accordance with the Voting Rights Act, both locally and nationally. And so I think our maps are in pretty good shape.
That was Christian Mitchell, who is the Democratic nominee for Illinois Lieutenant Governor. You can listen to the rest of our conversation by going to stlpr.org or wherever you find your politically speaking podcasts.
The Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wissentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.